I think of John Paul II, favoring the market economy indeed. The church has been suspicious of socialism from Leo the 13th on, but a market economy circumscribed legally and morally in all kinds of ways. So it's not like a just liberal libertarianism.
Supporting labor unions and
Right.
Yeah. So
right. So again, escaping the easy left-right divide.
Yeah.
But it's a minefield, isn't it? As Catholics have tried to make their way. But I wonder, as I said earlier, that a loss of confidence in our own great intellectual tradition, and not sort of begging for space within the liberal arena, but proposing a whole different vision of life.
So this is when I mentioned the younger generation. So it is a cause for hope for me, but I'll say qualified hope in the following sense that I think especially the younger generation of Catholics, I spend a lot of time on college campuses, my own campus, Notre Dame, a lot of other campuses, and the younger generation of those who would consider themselves to be really Orthodox Catholics, they're what we're talking about, they're there. They really see themselves as, and now this term that I've somewhat adopted, it's a subtitle of the regime change book, Postliberal, which has its roots and origins in post-liberal theology.
Right.
But post-liberal is becoming fashionable as a way of describing this because it sees itself as sort of succeeding liberalism, sort of rejecting liberalism to court in the ways we've been describing this as kind of trying to refashion a kind of more Aristotelian understanding for the modern age. So it's not pretending to go back. It's post-liberal. It recognizes where we are now. So I would say the younger generation of Catholics have to be among the most intellectually vibrant and engaged, maybe of Catholics of any time. I mean, can you think of a time in which sort of just kind of what you might think of as the average Catholic was reading Aquinas and Augustine and the most
the younger
all of the
seminarians.
Like I didn't know any, I didn't know the encyclicals growing up.
Right.
And I grew up in that sort of still quasi ghetto world in which we weren't taught encyclicals, much less Aquinas or Augustine. We read some version of the Baltimore Catechism. Know how to answer these questions. These are intellectually really engaged young people. So on the one hand, I think they're actually well armed in a way that maybe the generations that we came out of weren't. I do worry, though, that the faith could potentially move in too intellectual direction because, of course, it's a faith of practice and piety and practice, and not just for a kind of elite. It was the faith of ordinary people. And that's where I worry about the church increasingly. Is it's sort of its intellectual dimension. Like young college students who are engaged, I get invited all over the place, as I'm sure you do, to talk to these kinds of students.
Right.
But it's the average person who's not in touch with these sort of currents, who's working in the trades or working a service industry job, and how is the faith going to be alive for them? And of course, that's so much of what you're trying to do, I know.
Do you think, someone like Dorothy Day comes to mind, someone who combines, an intellectual dimension, but also this deep, moral commitment and also sharing a deep suspicion of the standard, culture for time. And I don't know,
Well, this is where in the second book, the latter book, Regime Change, I think a lot about, I'm trying to think a lot about the relationship of elites and the mass in this. Not the Catholic Mass, but the masses in this book. And here this is an effort to revive a kind of, again, an Aristotelian tradition of the idea of the mixed constitution, which in Aristotle's understanding, which I think is correct, as is so often the case, Aristotle understands that every society is in a way riven between some kind of relatively small number of people, the elite, and the large mass of people. And that there's a kind of natural antipathy between the two. And he says this often, not always, but often is defined by a difference of wealth. This tends to be the dividing line. And it just so happens that it's built into the nature of things that the few tend to have the most money and the many have less money, they're less wealthy. And that every society will tend to devolve into some kind of a civil war or anarchy as a result. And what will prevent this from happening is the big question. And as I'm reading and teaching Aristotle over the years, and as sort of the rise of populism and concern about elitism is kind of just in the air, I'm thinking, why aren't we talking more about Aristotle? Because he's describing exactly our circumstance. And what Aristotle proposes as at least one of the answers to this permanent condition of humanity is a kind of not hostile, but a kind of cooperative and even friendly relationship between the few and the many, which he calls polity, which is a word that means constitution. In other words, the idea of somehow mixing the elements. And in thinking about what he means by mixed constitution, what I truly try to explore is what would that mean for us today? And at the deepest level, having taught at Princeton, Georgetown, and Notre Dame, I think the contemporary elites coming out of institutions like mine mix very little with ordinary people. I think there's, in a way that maybe not to be nostalgic. Yeah, I mean, the kind of deplorables. That's the most, I would say,
extreme,
the most execrable and extreme form of that. But there's also a kind of non-prejudiced form of that, which is just not having any contact.
Living in different worlds.
Living in a kind of bubble.